The views and content expressed on the Pop Culture Courtroom are provided solely for educational and entertainment purposes and do not constitute legal advice. For any legal matters, please consult with a licensed attorney.
Welcome to the Pop Culture Courtroom podcast, where William Mayfield and I talk about pop culture things such as movies and TV that has injuries of some type and whether or not the person injured would have a court case based on what happened. Today, we're going to be doing the movie Caddyshack, which is under any metric, one of the two best golf movies ever.
From an artistic standpoint, definitely. You know, there are a couple silly ones that hold a special place in my heart, but I think if you asked anyone what their favorite golf movie is, from all ages, Caddyshack would do really, really well.
Well, should Caddyshack 2 exist?
That one probably wouldn't do quite as well. I saw a little bit of it, and if it continued how the first part did, I would say no.
Well, I've got a weakness for good, bad 80s movies, and it is just not a good, bad movie. It's just a bad movie. This one, on the other hand, is a great movie. A lot of the scenes they did off the cuff and weren't actually written in the script, but when you have all these great people in it, like Chevy Chase and Bill Murray, that are good at improvising as they go, you end up with gold sometime, and they definitely found it here. The movie Caddyshack is essentially about Rodney Dangerfield's character, Al Cervic, who's building a set of condos next door to Bushwood Country Club, golf course, and it's a pretty standard country club, where he is considering buying Bushwood. So a lot of it's about his interactions with the various members, including, Judge Smales, who's apparently the president of the club, based on the fact that he has an office. It's never particularly explained, but he has his own office there. And the particular scene we're going to talk about is related to a storm.
So in this scene, another character in the film, he's not quite as prevalent as Judge Smales or Rodney Dangerfield's character, Bishop Pickering, is playing golf. Bill Murray is also a prominent person in this scene. Bill Murray is a personal favorite of mine, not only because he's hilarious and was in some awesome movies like Ghostbusters, but because he is a huge Chicago Cubs fan.
And a pretty good golfer.
He's a pretty good golfer. He plays in the Pebble Beach Pro-Am every year. He always has some hijinks there, but I remember him and Eddie Vedder at Game 7 of the Cubs World Series, and just one of my favorite actors of all time. So he is a groundskeeper and a caddy, which is probably some creative liberty there.
I think he's really just a groundskeeper, and the bishop asked him to be his caddy, and he just agrees to do it. So a little more background about this movie: it was actually written mostly by Harold Ramis and by Bill Murray's brother, Brian Doyle Murray, and they, when growing up around Chicago, actually were caddies.
So it's a particularly bad weather day, and they start playing, and Bishop Pickering is having the round of his life. And most people who play golf have had that time where they start off incredibly well. I played a famous course out in Monterey called Spyglass Hill, and I remember that I was 3 under through 5. And I finished that round pretty average, but I'll always remember that I was 3 under through 5 there. And Bishop Pickering was having one of those types of days. Now, if you see the swing that he takes in the opening scene and the clubs that he was using, it's probably hard to believe that was happening, but they showed a lot of putting.
I looked at the bag that Bill Murray was, when we looked at this scene getting ready for today, and it looked like the bishop had like 7 or 8 clubs. So I'm not quite sure how you manage a non-par 3 golf course with only a putter and like 6 clubs.
I've played in some tournaments where you have to pick 4 clubs to play in them, but it's obviously a huge hindrance, and it wouldn't be particularly realistic, but helpful for Bill Murray because he's only having to carry 7 clubs instead of 14.
Well, in modern golf courses, for those of you that play golf, they are all over the weather. I mean, they're very worried about, potential liability related to people that are playing on their course getting injured. And here, there's lightning before he even tees off. And he goes and asks Bill Murray if he can try to get in 9 before the storm gets worse. And Bill Murray readily, as an employee of the club, picks up the clubs and off they go.
So they start playing, and you see like him hit a putt past the hole, and like the wind brings it back, which is obviously a little bit unrealistic, even though it did happen in Space Jam as well. But I think that was Bugs Bunny with a magnet.
Well, he chips in one hole, and a frog jumps out of the water-filled hole right after the ball goes in somehow.
And early in the round, you see all these kind of miracle type things happening. and he is excited, and he wants to keep playing. And you see a group of golfers and a guy in a suit walk by, and they are rushing to the clubhouse. And so the guy in the suit stops and talks to him, and basically spends like 10 seconds talking to him about how well he was playing, which is interesting because right after that he says, "You better get to the clubhouse." And it's hard for us to know whether that person worked for the course or not. Him being in a sport coat makes it seem like he might work for the course, because that's not what you would typically wear playing golf. But that's kind of our first interaction of someone that was an employee or agent of the course potentially suggesting that maybe they should get off the golf course due to weather.
Well, there's a bunch of people on foot walking through right there when he's clearly at least 5 or 6 holes into the round at that point. So I'm not sure where in the middle of the course you'd have a crowd of people without golf clubs just walking through there, but that's what happens.
Creative liberty. So at that point, Bishop Pickering doesn't completely ignore what he was told, but asks Bill Murray's character, who the movie intentionally tries to lead you to believe is maybe not the sharpest guy, should we keep playing or not? And that's when the iconic line,
I keep playing. I don't think the heavy stuff's going to come down for quite a while.
comes out, when clearly the weather was already really, really poor.
Yeah, he ultimately goes ahead and finishes the round in what appears to be a monsoon. This is not just like a storm. They're having trouble even walking in the wind. There's so much of it. Lightning's continuing. He gets down to his last shot on the 9th hole, and he misses what appears to be a 6 or 7 foot putt, holds up his golf club and gets struck by lightning. Bill Murray then sets the clubs down and runs off.
And we noticed in that scene, and watching it earlier, that for some reason it is pitch black dark in that scene. Now, I understand that when the weather gets bad, it gets a little bit dark, but it is bona fidely nighttime, and they're still playing golf. Something that struck me as a golfer on that scene is that 6 or 7 foot putt that he missed. I presume that he is an amateur golfer, like 99.99% of people, but a pro golfer is about 50-50 to make a 7.5 foot putt. He shouldn't be that upset about missing a 7 foot putt.
Well, I mean, if you consider at this point, he's, at least from what they're representing, might be like 6 under going through 9, which is phenomenal. And he gets a par instead. He's still at 6 under. So, I mean, it's not really clear what he's putting for at that point. He says something about getting the club record, but I'm not aware of any clubs that are going to have club records for just 9 holes. It's 18 holes a full round.
Absolutely. So what we're going to explore today is, he gets struck by lightning. Presumably there's a large injury. Bill Murray leaves him there, leaves the clubs there, leaves the flag there, and just walks off. Who's at fault for this injury?
Well, I think it's a pretty interesting question. In general, I don't think it takes a Mensa candidate to understand that if there's a lightning storm, you're taking a lot of risks playing golf. In this particular case, we have comparative fault. Of the Bishop, we've talked about this before, where in Tennessee and other states, comparative fault means essentially that more than one person can be at fault for a particular injury. And so a jury will essentially take the 100% and then divide it among one or more people if they think they're at fault. And so the Bishop going out and playing in a lightning storm right off the bat, he's going to get some significant fault because he seems to play a lot of golf and know that, being in an open area with a lightning storm is not a great idea. However, there's a caveat to this. He's got a club employee with him. And so what are your thoughts about respondeat superior in that situation?
Yeah, so the two big things that jumped out to me when we decided to talk about this today is really 2 words: notice and agency. And respondeat superior is a principle that basically means that any agent of a company or partnership or whatever organization that you have,
Your employees.
employees, that company is liable or on the hook for actions or decisions made by the employees. Sometimes caddies can be independent contractors, but given that he worked for the golf course in another capacity
And live there.
the strong likelihood was that he is an employee.
And that complicates things quite a bit here, mainly in the sense that, the Bishop, after the what appears to be another Bushwood employee tells him that he better wait, asks the other employee, should we keep going? And what does he say?
That's when he says, I don't think the heavy stuff's going to come down for a while. Let's keep playing. So at that point, it's an interesting question for the jury. First of all, we need to figure out the identity of this jacketed man. Is that just his buddy that was walking by and giving him a suggestion, or was that, a club president or a club pro or something like that? If that is a club pro, I think it could potentially be inferred that you should trust the word of a club pro more than a de facto caddy groundskeeper.
Now, this is in 1980. Why would somebody working at the golf course be wearing, what's essentially a suit or a fancy blazer? I don't know what position that person would be in unless they were maybe the club manager would be wearing something that nice. Those guys are usually dressed up. But anybody on the golf course is wearing golf shirts or golf clothing, and this guy does not have that on.
So, yeah, I tend to agree with you that this is certainly someone who represents the club in some manner. I played in a member guest a year and a half ago where the club... the pros were wearing ties that day, and I think it was 93 degrees, and it felt like borderline abuse. but
Well, one of the greatest inventions of the last 50 years, of course, is dry fit. So, I mean, breathable fabrics are pretty important to happiness in life.
So, if we assume that guy is an employee, you could make the argument either way. You could certainly make the argument like, hey, who is the more reasonable person to take their opinion? The pro or the manager or whatnot, or this caddy makeshift kind of groundskeeper person?
I think most people are going to listen to Bill Murray because Bill Murray's awesome.
And then you could also
name some of the movies that other guy's in. Can you do
that? I can't. But I will also say is you could make the argument that he was given two opinions. He took one, and that he relied on that opinion to his detriment.
I just tend to believe that was not an employee, because I think if that was an actual somebody associated with either the golf pro or the starter or somebody like that, they would have just straight told him get off the course.
Yeah,
I mean, golf courses, and I don't see this in this scene, have a siren that goes off, and it means get off the golf course now.
Absolutely. I've been in rain delays before. It's almost always accompanied with a siren. And even though I don't necessarily know that the course has a duty to do this, in general, for their liability protection and whatnot, they're going to send a pro around to tell everybody to get off the golf course. That wasn't how this interaction went. It was more of a suggestion or even just a piece of advice. It wasn't a directive.
And that made me think that he was not an employee. So then we're back to Bill Murray and our comparative fault thing. I think it's arguable, 50-50. So what happens in Tennessee if it's 50-50?
Nothing good for the plaintiff. Unfortunately, Tennessee, we have the standard of more likely than not, and you have to be less than 50% at fault for anything that happens to you to recover. So 50-50 is not good enough.
What about Kentucky? Would he be in better shape there?
He would have been a lot better shape in Kentucky. If you are 99% at fault in Kentucky, you can recover for the 1% you're not. Now, the cost analysis there wouldn't be very good, because the 1% is probably not even going to cover the costs of your case. But that's how the law works. And 50-50, there's a lot of 50-50 situations in the law. And in Kentucky, you can at least recover the 50% you're not at fault.
But you also have to look at it, realistically. What is the jury going to award in a situation where you're mostly at fault, and even in a what's called a pure comparative fault state like Kentucky? You're going to have an uphill climb on a case like this one, I think.
Absolutely. And I kind of want to go into, I think the two words I touched on earlier were agency and notice. And we've talked a lot about agency. The notice is a simple principle, but the fact that we've talked at length so far in this podcast about how bad the weather was. And that is a huge factor here. It's not like it was daylight outside and they're on hole 7 and then all of a sudden the skies open up and it starts pouring and he gets hit with lightning. He knew the weather was horrible. They show him putting. He even says God wouldn't ruin the best round of my life, which that was he was inspired to say that because clearly there was a ton of weather going on. He had been playing in bad weather for a very, very long time, and he had tons of notice that this was probably not a good idea.
Yeah, I agree.
It was open and obvious. Whereas had it just been a pop-up storm and 5 seconds later he had been struck by lightning, that's a different story. But I think there's a massive amount of assumption of the risk here.
I tend to agree with that. And assumption of the risk means that you've essentially gotten into an activity that has danger involved, and you decided to do it anyways, and that's somewhat subsumed by the comparative fault, but it's still thought of in that way. So ultimately, case or no case?
It's not a case I would want to take on for the bishop. The problem is that I think it's clear as day that he assumed the risk, that there was notice that he was in a risky situation, and he proceeded forward anyway. The other side, where he relied on a not so reliable source in Bill Murray's character to go forward, isn't enough for me to overcome that. So particularly in Tennessee, this would not be one that I would want to be involved in. But in Kentucky, even with the pure comparative fault, I still probably wouldn't be super interested in this
Well, I will say this. I mean, the bishop isn't seeing the rest of the movie like us. He's only seeing the scenes he's in. So, he plays a lot of golf there. All he knows is Bill Murray works at the club. I don't think he knows anything about his proclivities.
That sounds like a plaintiff's attorney argument there.
It definitely is.
Yeah, so,
you
if I were a jury, I don't know that I would buy that, but I really like where your head's at.
All we know is this poor bishop, this elderly man that has gone out and shooting so well, is relying on the club to steer him correctly in this weather. And he, during this great round, asked the club employee whether he should keep playing, knowing that they keep an eye on such things as the weather. And ultimately, the person working for the club tells him, Carl tells him, go ahead and play. I think it's a hard case. Do I think it's one that a club like this would want publicized? I do not. I mean, there's awful things happen with lightning on these clubs. I read a biography recently on Bobby Jones, the won the Grand Slam in the 1920s, one of the greatest golfers ever as an amateur. Was playing at his home course in Atlanta, where they now do the tour finals. The Westlake. Eastlake, yeah, Eastlake. Had a light.
They might be building a Westlake at some point, but
maybe. I don't know. It's east of here. So he was playing around. Sudden storm came up. Lightning hit the chimney of the clubhouse. One of the bricks came flying out after that, hit him in the back very hard, knocked him down. And ultimately, that's what helped. He's in his 20s at that point. That's ultimately what led to his medical condition. That was the wasting disease that he had that killed him. That came out of a lightning storm.
And you're
one of the greatest golfers ever played.
You're really good with your golf history. I know you're really well read with that. One of the interesting facts about Bobby Jones, his Grand Slam is not the one you think of today, which would be the Masters, PGA Championship, the U.S. Open, and the British Open. He maintained his amateur status. And so his was the U.S. Open, the British Open, the U.S. Amateur, and the British Amateur.
Well, and this was in the 1920s at a time that even playing the British Open meant that you were on a boat for several weeks. So not a lot of the Americans went over there and played. And the Masters didn't even exist at that point because he had not founded it yet, which happened a few years after that. And he was not allowed to play in the PGA because it was only professional golfers at that time.
So just to revisit one thing about your plaintiff's argument, you were kind of trying to paint the bishop as someone who's incompetent, unable to thinking on his own, and had to rely completely on others' opinions. His title is bishop, so he's been placed in front of a group of people for other people to rely upon his opinions and seek his guidance. So I don't know if I'm buying that he needs the advice of Bill Murray. Now, his level of expertise, just because you're a bishop and you know about, those types of things, doesn't mean you know anything about golf, but you don't have to know about golf. Being out in lightning is common sense, and holding up a metal stick, which he literally does at the very end, is common sense as well. I'm going to go firm. No case.
I just feel bad that you're attacking this kindly old man that's spent his life, working for God with the Catholic Church, and just comes out with his 7 golf clubs and his terrible golf swing. I think we'd agree on, and wants to play a few holes of golf. And the club employee tells him, "You're good to play." I mean, he's an expert in spiritual things, not in weather at a golf course. So I mean, I agree with you. It's a hard case, and then on top of it, your employee that you're blaming is Bill Murray, one of the most likable actors ever. So you've got to deal with that. These other issues, things like, was that guy a club employee, will come out in what's called written discovery, or discovery period, where you essentially get to find out what the evidence the other side has. So that would be figured out. This to me feels like the kind of case that you write a letter depending on what his medical bills are. I mean, getting hit by lightning is a really big deal. A lot of people die from that. And so he seems to be fine because he's having a drink in the bar, a little grouchy later in the movies.
I do agree with you that the club doesn't want this getting publicized, and there's a lot of value in that. I do agree with you that the club has some blame. I mean, you have you do have a duty to people. Again, we've argued this situation, but there could be someone less competent out there that doesn't know about weather, and there could be a less obvious weather situation. And in every golf course I've ever been to, I know I've talked to the head pro where I play, they keep an eye on the weather for you, and they let you know when it's no longer safe to play. And Bushwood did not meet that standard in this.
That's correct. And I think that's where I would go with it, that they're not doing the things like, just to be very clear, my club that I go to they'd be all over this. This would never have happened there. And if it ever did happen, it's because somebody was fool enough to get out there and try to play in something and get away with it. And that'd be that person's fault. So, this situation we're talking about, I think Bushwood itself probably has some negligence with what their weather policies are. The Bishop's definitely getting some fault for this because he's made let's just call it what it is. It's a foolish decision. The clubs that William and I go to here in the Nashville area would be so much more on the ball in this. And if somebody did something like this, it's going to be the golfer's fault that this happened, not the club, because they would have taken steps to make it not happen.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think if they paid anything, they would basically be paying for no publicity. It's not a situation where we can just send over the Bishop's medical bills and ask those to be paid. It's really they're paying for there to not be negative publicity about how they really aren't handling the golf course in a way that they should.
So I think ultimately what we're saying is there's a case, but it's not a good one.
Correct.
Let's move on to our irrelevant evidence. For this week's irrelevant evidence, we're going to review the golf swings of those folks who swing a golf club in this movie. So William here, as some of you may know, was a college golfer here at David Lipscomb in Nashville. He's still quite good. I play golf, but not nearly at the level that William does. But we have a good time doing it.
You're improving at a higher rate than I don't improve anymore. I'm just trying to get less worse, if that's a thing. So
when you shoot low scores like William does, there's not as much margin. When you started a place of being a beginner a few years ago, like I did, there's a lot of room to go, but I do enjoy it. It's a lot of fun. And so I appreciate William as the person that got me into playing in the first place. And I've gotten a lot of joy out of it. But one of the things we've talked about a minute ago was the Bishop's swing. And so we have a number of golfers that play golf in this, they're actors. You have Danny Noonan's character played by Michael O'Keefe. You have his rival in the Caddyshack that they play in the tournament with. You have Chevy Chase character Ty Webb that plays. You have the Bishop. You have Dr. Beeper, Judge Smales. I don't think we ever see Spalding Smales go. He tells him he's going to play golf and not tennis, but I don't remember him actually swinging a club. You have the two elderly people that are, 200-300 years old that are playing. And is there anybody else I'm missing? The judge, of course. Yeah. And then Rodney Dangerfield, Al Cervic. I think those is kind of our list of the 10 or so golfers that we actually see do a lot of swings. And the people that they posit as being the aces are essentially Ty Webb and Danny Noonan.
Yeah, I would say give the slight edge to Danny Noonan.
How come?
He's got a little bit more firepower, I think. I'm still young, or at least think I am, but I don't hit it as far as I used to. And Danny Noonan, I can still see that pop in his swing. The swing speed. And Ty Webb, even though I guess Chevy Chase is 80 now, so in this movie he would have been
mid
36. So he's about how old I am now, and I
mid 30s or so. Yeah,
I'm 34, and I could see him starting to change his game a little bit. I hit the ball straighter than I used to, but nowhere near as far. It's kind of the same difference. It's just a different way of doing things. But if Danny Noonan really put his nose to the grindstone and got after it, I think he could be a really high level golfer. There's really not anybody else in the movie that strikes me as like a really good player. Now Judge Smales probably shoots really good scores, but that's because he cheats. And
I thought it's because he never sliced.
Yeah. Now his cheating isn't as blatant as Rodney Dangerfield's character.
Winner rules, William.
Yeah, winner rules. So that's kind of what struck me about their golf swing.
Well, I suppose we even see a form of Bill Murray's golf swing when he's slicing the flowers and pretending he's winning the Masters.
Well, I've actually seen Bill Murray's real golf swing, quite a bit at the Pebble Beach Pro-Am, and
that's good.
He's not a bad player at all. We're gonna do an official ranking here. I'm gonna start from the top. Ty Webb, Danny Noonan. It's a really close call. Ty Webb looks like one of those guys who's gotten to a place in his career where he plays golf more than he will ever admit publicly. But
What's all he does in the movie?
Yeah.
He like talks about owning lumber yards and just has checks from them for tons of money he doesn't even cash.
He certainly seems like the guy where, he could get a text on any old Tuesday morning and you busy today? And he always plays golf. And that certainly helps your golf game.
Dr. Beeper seems like he's pretty good because he plays as the judge, and it's really close score against Danny Noonan and Ty Webb. Though Ty doesn't really play very well in the contest, at least at the end.
Correct. So I would go. I'm still going to go Danny Noonan 1 overall. That's just kind of I coached golf when I was in law school, and we won a couple of middle school state championships. Not to brag, but still. And some of those guys are playing college golf. Shout out Jackson Huey, Ben Johnston, if y'all are listening. But anyway, I see the potential in Danny Noonan. And I've just got to go with him as number 1 overall because he's got all these tools to be a really, really good player. Ty Webb I would go number 2. I think that maybe he and Noonan are similar, but that Ty Webb is probably maximizing his skill where maybe Noonan isn't.
I read that Michael O'Keefe, the actor who plays Danny Noonan, didn't play golf for many, many years after this because of this being associated with this movie that he wanted to move on from.
I've been burnt out on golf before, but I'm very much not there right now. I love it. So
I'd say Dr. Beeper's probably.
I would say Dr. Beeper is definitely number 3. I mean, we're kind of like, here's the line of competency, right? We've got Noonan and Ty who are good players, and then Dr. Beeper is competent, and then there's really not anybody else that's particularly good. I would say Judge Smales is probably 4th, but he thinks he's 1st or 2nd. One quick note on Judge Smales, and then I would put Rodney Dangerfield's character 5th. Doesn't really hold out to be that good golfer. He's the guy who likes golf but really likes to gamble.
I kind of feel like the way the movie portrays it, Dr. Beeper would probably be 5th. I mean, he challenges for the club record. He plays a ton, and Rodney Dangerfield fakes an injury in the middle of the contest so he don't have to play anymore.
So Rodney Dangerfield, they're not trying to sell Rodney Dangerfield's character as a good golfer, but as a brief aside, the amount of money that they play for, it would be a lot now. I think they start at $20,000, then it gets raised to $40,000, and then by the end it's $80,000.
And that whole sequence makes no sense. How they talk about because I think the putt was just a tie. It wasn't even to win. Then they do like it's all double or nothing on one putt.
And it wasn't a particularly short putt. I mean, if you look at, there's a guy I follow on Twitter or X or whatever you call it now, named Lou Stagner, who gives these incredible golf stats. And really the takeaway from all those golf stats is that golf is a lot harder than we think it is, and nobody's nearly as good as they think they are. If you look at this putt that they're betting on, it's definitely less than a 50% putt.
Well, and it's funny because the other great comedy golf movie is, of course, Happy Gilmore, and there's some very funny scoring in that movie as well.
These matches always seem to come down to the last hole for some reason. So, but that would be my order.
Who's the worst golfers?
Those people that Noonan is caddying for at the beginning of the movie, I don't see how they could possibly be having fun doing what they're doing.
About the elderly couple?
Yeah.
It's not Danny Noonan. It's the other guy that he has the rivalry with.
You're right. You're right. Well, regardless, they're advancing the ball like 10 yards at a time.
Whose name we don't remember.
But you know what? Golf is meant to be fun for everyone that plays. So whatever level you play, get out there and play against someone of the same level or play against someone better and make them give you some strokes.
Yeah, and this movie has one other similarity, I think, with Happy Gilmore is that there's Rodney Dangerfield drives his car out right onto the fairway, just like that happens with the heckler and Happy Gilmore.
Yeah, Rodney. I think if I were ranking characters from people who make the movie, I would say Rodney Dangerfield's character would be number 1.
He's phenomenal in this.
He's great. He certainly wasn't the main character. I would say that would have been Noonan or Ty Webb or even Judge Smales is probably a more significant character. But Rodney Dangerfield, this ultimately is a comedy. And anytime it feels like it's getting somewhat stale, Rodney Dangerfield's around the corner to save the situation.
Well, I think this movie doesn't work at all unless you have Rodney Dangerfield and Ted Knight in it. And Ted Knight was, by all accounts, a very, very kind man, and he played this kind of crotchety, uptight, club guy in this, and knocked it out of the park. They're both phenomenal in this.
Yeah, and doing some research for this before we started, I saw that Ted Knight passed away in 1986, which I think was 6 years following the making of this. So I unfortunately haven't seen as much with him, but I did love his character, and he played the villain really, really well.
Yeah. Well, thanks for joining us here at the Pop Culture Courtroom, and we're going to see you in part 2 of Caddyshack, where we're going to look at the boat scene from the movie. Thanks for coming.
Thanks, guys. The Pop Culture Courtroom is a Matt Hardin Law production.
If you've been involved in a car wreck or any other type of personal injury or wrongful death case, check us out at matthardinlaw.com or give us a call at 615-200-1111.